Hello, beloveds. Welcome to the Amanda Collins podcast. It's my honor to help you awaken to joy, be your greatest self, and live a life you love. I'm Amanda Collins. Each week, I'll share tips, practices, and rituals to help you feel the storehouse of joy inside. I'll answer your questions and talk with thought leaders from around the world about health, wealth, love, conscious living, and parenting. Are you ready to live your most fulfilled life? Welcome to episode 55. In this podcast with Dr. Zach, he shares with us that there's only 60 more harvests left on the planet unless we start doing things differently. Growing our own veggies, the food that we buy, the way we live, the way we eat. We're going to learn all about different ways that we can be the change that is needed on our planet right now. Thank you, Nicola, for this glowing review. Nicola says, "This podcast is something I look forward to each week. Every single episode has valuable information and guidance for me. Amanda has a magical way of holding space, and it's such a pleasure to listen to her. The fascinating topics explored in each episode with worldwide experts are truly helpful to most anyone. Thank you, Amanda, for this wonderful gift." Zach Bush, MD, is one of the few triple board certified physicians in the country with expertise in internal medicine, endocrinology and metabolism, and hospice care. The breakthrough science that Dr. Bush and his colleagues have delivered offer profound new insights into human health and longevity. In 2012, he discovered a family of carbon-based redox molecules made by bacteria. He and his team subsequently demonstrated that this cellular communication network functions to compensate for glyphosate and many other dietary, chemical, and pharmaceutical toxins that disrupts our body's natural defense systems. This science has resulted in a revolutionary class of dietary supplements, including the products Restore. Dr. Bush points to his kids as the driving force behind his passion for change. He is fiercely motivated by a desire to have them experience a much brighter and healthier future. His education efforts provide a grassroots foundation from which we launch change in our legislative decisions, ultimately upshifting consumer behavior to bring about radical change in the mega industries of big farming, big pharma, and Western medicine at large. Learn more at zachbushmd.com, www.restoreforlight.com, and www.intrinsichealthseries.com. I am so honored to have Zach Bush, MD, here with us today. Thank you, Dr. Zach, for being here with us.
What a pleasure to be on. And thank you for having me, Amanda, and everybody in the audience. Thank you for your time and attention. Thrilled to be with you.
Delighted to have you here, and I would love to kind of get stuck into just hearing a little bit about your story, about what got you into this field. Like, what was, I know I've read definitely that your children are a huge catalyst, but tell us more.
Yeah, so my background is in very kind of typical Western medicine, allopathic training, medical with training in internal medicine, which is general adult care. That's kind of the foundation of hospital-based medicine. It's the foundation of all the subspecialties, things like cardiology and renal, kidney health, pulmonary, cancer, oncology, all of these. So the subspecialties come after the internal medicine. And so I did internal medicine, spent a lot of time in the hospital systems, went on to a chief resident year teaching on faculty, at the University of Virginia, and then subsequently did a subspecialty in endocrinology and metabolism, which is the study of hormones, as well as the study of mitochondria and how they regulate metabolism or fuel production and repair of the body. So that was my subspecialty. And during my endocrinology and metabolism, I got into cancer research to understand how cancers develop around this issue of metabolism and mitochondrial function, or the dysfunction thereof. So that was my area of expertise. I was developing chemotherapy as of 10 years ago out of vitamin A compounds. And in that journey, got myself starting to look at nutrition. And so I've been now on a long bend to figure that out. And so I left the academic environment in 2010 and started a nutrition center for reversing chronic disease through lifestyle and food. That journey, after a couple of years, made me realize that for all of the decades of good clinical research and data coming out of the plant-based medicine world, the areas of fasting and things like this, that it didn't work very consistently anymore, that there was a lot of breakdown in the function of food itself. And so started to really dive deeper into what's happened to our food system. And when you look at the nutrients in a tomato or a piece of kale today versus 30 or 40 years ago, it's night and day. We have lost the nutrient density in our food and now just have kind of empty calories sitting in what should be a healthy food. In addition, we were seeing people's inflammation markers going up with something like kale instead of down. And so that really forced our hand further to ask deeper questions about, is it possible that the food can actually hurt us? And that's where we started to really discover the truth about the chemicals that are being used in our modern agricultural systems, ending up in our water systems of the rivers and the ocean, ending up in the food itself, ending up in the air we breathe, the rain that falls on us, and the rest. And so I started in 2013 a biotech company focused on the role of bacteria and fungi and the microbiome around us and in our soils, and how that goes on to support human biology, human genetics, human cancer risk, the cancer survival. All of these things are now very well understood to be tied up in the microbiology, this micro ecosystem of the bacteria and the fungi, and impacted radically by our farming and food industries. So in a nutshell, that's the last 20 years of my life.
Oh my gosh, that is incredible. I'm just taking all that in. That's amazing. And I think the first question I would ask is, what are the top things that we can do knowing this information? What are some of the most important things that we can do, first of all, when it comes to the food and it not having that nutrition in it anymore?
Yeah. The exciting thing and perhaps the sad thing to begin with, and the exciting thing about it, is that we really created this environment of toxic food and massive chemical companies growing our food by our laziness in some ways. We've been pursuing as a consumer industry for the last 50 years, focused on convenience. And so that convenience lifestyle, where we've moved from the end of World War II, when in Ireland and England and the United States, we were growing 45% of our food system in our backyard victory gardens at the end of World War II. And so we were contributing nearly half of the food industry through our gardens. And now today we're down to less than 1/10% of our food grown in our backyard gardens. And so as we stopped as humans participating in this food industry, we really created the demand for these mega companies to step in and meet the opportunity to grow all the food on the planet at these extreme scales. And so that is where we can also begin the reversal of this problem. And we have to, because our survival is now on the line. We're at an incredible tipping point biologically. We are currently engineering the 6th great extinction on the planet. The last one, the 5th extinction, was with the dinosaurs 55 million years ago. And here today, engineering through our chemical environments that we've created, the collapse of biology on the planet. And so currently we are estimating about one species disappearing from Earth every 20 minutes now. And so the speed at which we are causing this mass extinction is mind-boggling. And it's starting to now undermine our potential to survive. And so if we look at the diseases, we can see autism rising from 1 in 5,000 children to 1 in 30 children now. And so this speed at which our neurologic injury is happening to our children nearly straight out of the womb, or at least within the first 2 years of life, they're getting these huge neurologic injuries. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorders now affecting 1 in 6 or 1 in 8 children. Amazing amount of sensory processing deficiency in our children. And then we look at their immune system function and we see another catastrophic injury. And so something like 1 in 4 children with severe allergies to pollens, molds, food things, everything from the classic peanut allergy all the way to the new insensitivities to the legumes and as a large group, as well as the grains, as well as things like your gluten sensitivity being the classic one there. So all of these things are fueling a chronic disease epidemic in our children. The rate of brain cancers in children is skyrocketing. The rate of autoimmune disease now affecting 1 in 4 girls by age 12 with antibodies to some sort of internal structure, the thyroid gland or otherwise. And so we really have created this situation where current statistics are somewhere around 40% to 50% of children in developed countries are now facing a chronic disorder or disease as children. And that's never happened in human history, that we've burdened our children with chronic disease like this. And so we have to change, and we have to begin this revolution at that grassroots level, quite literally, where we need to go back to the soil and the root systems of the earth to say we're going to start to participate in a real revolution of our relationship to Mother Nature itself, and in particular to our food chain. And so if we're not growing our own garden next year, then we need to be at least knowing our farmers and making sure that our farmers are being incentivized and supported to make the transition from chemical farming to what we would call regenerative organic farming, where the regenerative piece there means that they're not just changing their spraying routines and reducing chemical use, also now farming without disrupting the soil, without plowing, without using the diskers and plows. That's a pretty big revolution to undergo, and it works extremely well. When you stop disrupting the soil, the microbiome with the mycorrhizae, the fungal components with the huge mycelium beds and the bacteria therein, all of this creates a massive carbon sink, reverses the global warming trends, and starts to put carbon back into the soil and therefore back into our food. And we end up getting this nutrient density back into the food that would feed our cattle, our swine, our poultry, to have that nutriency that we once experienced 30 or 40 years ago. And so that's the revolution at hand. We need to become a regenerative agricultural system, and that charge has to be taken on by our citizens and our consumers at large.
Wow, I mean, that's just heartbreaking to hear everything that you've shared. And then also it's empowering to know that we can make change. And a lot of people may say, well, I don't have a garden, and it's like, well, you can create a community garden and everybody in the neighborhood can work on it. I was reading your materials, and you did mention that there's only 60 more harvests left on the planet. Is that correct?
Yeah, stunning, and I found that statistic out from the farm scientists last year. And, previous to that, it was pretty clear from the human health side that we have on our current trajectory maybe 70 years left of human life on Earth. And that's really being driven by the rise in this chronic disease epidemic in adults as much as children. We've seen a 4 to 5x increase in neurologic injury in adults, with Alzheimer's, dementia in women leading the charge, Parkinson's leading the charge in males, but also multiple sclerosis, ALS or Lou Gehrig syndrome, also blowing up. And so these 4 or 5x increases in neurologic decline in adults. An amazing study came out of the University of Virginia showing that by age 28, there was neurocognitive findings in 100% of the subjects in this large national study, showing that you could see early signs of dementia by age 28. And so, we really are starting to reach this catastrophic loss of productivity, and we're, I think, putting Band-Aids on that with the computer industry and with the effort to increase productivity through computer-aided productivity and data analysis and all this. But the human humans behind those screens are really losing their function and productivity at a very young age. And so we have this extraordinary shift just neurologically. And then again, we look across the rest of the diseases, type 2 diabetes and obesity now affecting 1 in 3 to 1 in 5 adults in the United States. We have the autoimmune conditions going bonkers, everything from type 1 diabetes to autoimmune thyroiditis, thyroid conditions, autoimmune arthritis conditions, lupus and rheumatoid arthritis and the like, all the way to cancer itself. We're hitting 1 in 2 adults with cancer while we hit 1 in 30 children with autism. We're currently on a rise in that disease epidemic where by 2035, just 15 years from now, we expect to see 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 children with autism. At that point, we've really lost productivity in that entire generation, as it will take 2 individuals to support 1 child with autism as they grow into adulthood. And so that whole generation will be really having to support just that 1 condition, while meanwhile, since the burden of cost in the developed world for healthcare has already dwarfed any other sector of the economy. In the United States, I can give you a sense of that. We were spending about $680 billion a year on defense. And so that's all of our military spending, homeland security, anti-terrorism, immigration. So that $680 billion is a large number, but it's dwarfed by the $3.5 trillion spending on healthcare than we do on all of our military spending worldwide. So our healthcare costs just dwarf any other sector of our economy, and it's the fastest growing sector. We expect to be spending $5 trillion a year by 2025. And so this just can't keep up from a fiscal standpoint. The cost of care, of course, is then further complicated by a drop in productivity of that increasingly sick population. So the United States, best case scenario, we've got 15 to 20 years left before we are completely at our financial endpoint as an empire or as a social structure. And so empires have risen and fallen in the United States now. And so we're in this desperate last throes of function as a government as we keep shuffling the deck chairs, trying to keep this house of cards afloat. And the thing that just keeps the tide that's undermining that house of cards is this rising chronic disease epidemic. And so it's a crisis point that needs to be paid attention to worldwide, because I really believe that in our developing economies and in the very large economies around the world that we see coming on, India and China being obvious, but I really think Africa being the big future. In those environments, if we learn from the mistakes we've made in the United States and other developed countries and re-engineer the food environments and healthcare systems of those developing economies, we can really avert complete collapse of the Western civilization that we've seen spread around the world. So we have an incredible tipping point. And so we got into this talking about the 60 harvests. If you look at that human biologic collapse, 70 years left, partly driven by all that chronic disease undermining human survival. But ultimately, it comes down to our reproductivity. And so there's been about drops in males in the United States over the last 25 years. And so in one generation, to cut sperm counts in half, if we do that again, we'll see some 60, 70% of males infertile. If in another 50 years we do that yet again, we will have near 90% of males infertile, and one more time, and you see the complete collapse of our ability to reproduce. And so that's where the demise of our species really comes on, loss of productivity and reproductivity fueling that thing. So as the numbers stand on the human health side, to see that we won't, without massive sea changes in our environmental impact and our relationship to nature, we have 70 years left. And then to find out from the farmers that at the current trajectory of death of soils around the world and the collapse of the bee populations, the pollinating birds and other species, we've only got 60 harvests left on the planet. And so you can't destroy biology on one side of the planet ecosystem and expect it not to have immediate and equal repercussions elsewhere in the planetary biology. And so it's no wonder that human health collapses at about the same rate as soil survival, because the two are intrinsically and inseparably related.
Absolutely, yeah. And we talk about this oneness, and of course, we're in alignment with whatever's going on with the planet, and it's directly affecting us health wise. Wow, like those statistics are so scary. And so, okay, well, I love that your first point was like, we need to go back to the grassroots. We need to go back to what we used to be connected with the land, grow our own vegetables, live in that more harmonious way. What would be the next thing? Because I know everybody listening to you is going to be like, I want to make a difference. It's like, here's the raw truth. And so what would be the next thing that you suggest that, we could be empowered by? What else can we do?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we've been working on that piece. We've been working on understanding our connection to biology. And so 2013, 6 years ago, we launched a whole biotech company around using ancient soil and the nutrients and carbon signaling system or communication network in those ancient soils to improve human health. In that journey, we discovered that the lights in those fossil soil happen to function as an antidote to these common toxins in our food chain. And so roundup chemical is the most common now worldwide. It's the active ingredient in the weed killer Roundup is called glyphosate. And glyphosate is now present in 75% of the air and 75% of the rainfall in most of our agricultural environments in the United States and elsewhere. We see it contaminating the vast majority of our fruits and vegetables. And then it trickles down into our large animals that then consume those plants as their main feed source. And ultimately, the human ends up eating somewhere around 2 parts per million or 2 parts per billion in our water system, 2 parts to 20 parts per million in our food system of this chemical glyphosate. And so this glyphosate chemical is undermining human biology on lots of different levels. Interestingly, it primarily is affecting the gut lining and the vascular system in the way it should be protecting us. And so it undermines a protein called tight junctions. And the tight junctions are what keep our self-identity intact. It helps the human body understand, at least that was our old model of how this whole thing worked. And so then we add glyphosate, and we see that the tight junctions, or the Velcro that holds that whole barrier system in place, erodes and collapses. And with the collapse of that barrier, the immune system then gets overwhelmed by everything that happens to us. And so we develop food sensitivity, pollens and environmental sensitivities to seasonal allergies and the like. And then eventually, with the overwhelm of the immune system, we start to mistrigger our immune system, and it starts to attack our own body. And so we've lost our self-identity at the cellular level with this constant exposure to Roundup and glyphosate that we start to kind of have this collapse of human biology. And so the first things that we need to do as a population, if we're going to say, all right, how do we start to reverse this epidemic from Alzheimer's to cancer, from autism to autoimmune disease, we've got to start to produce clean soil. And to do that, again, we can rely on the bacteria and fungi that can help us in the supplements. We can now help soil produce that on its own. And we do that by training farmers. Traditional farming techniques, 900 AD, the invention of the plow. For the last 1100 years, we've been plowing to put seeds in the ground. When you plow, you completely disrupt the soil architecture. You destroy mycorrhizae, the mycelium, destroy bacterial ecosystems, and ultimately, kill some of the macro life in there too. You're damaging earthworm populations and the rest. And so the plowing has to end. And so when we say we need to go back to this grassroots movement like we used to, we can't go back to where we were in the 1960s and expect to recover. We will slow down the damage, but we're not actually going to improve the health of humans or the planet until we go back to before 900 in our farming practices and stop plowing. And so that's what we've now done. We've created a nonprofit. Farmers Footprint is our education angle on that nonprofit. If you check out farmersfootprint.us or .us, and it's a mission to educate consumers and farmers alike on how and why we need to get back engaged with soil in this no-till, no-plow, no-spray organic production of food crops. And so we are helping farmers make this transition now. And so that's a way as a consumer that get directly involved, you can farmer who, yes, I'm ready to make this transition, stop spraying chemicals into my soil and water systems, stop delivering food to the plate that has these chemicals in it, start producing real food, clean food, and get back engaged. And so Farmers Footprint is cutting out the middlemen that have ultimately created a very false economy and kept farmers growing the wrong things. That false economy is created by governments in the U.S. We have something called the Farm Bill, where we have subsidized the growth of corn, soybeans, sugar beets, a lot of things that are not good for human or animal consumption. The farmers are incentivized to grow those based on a false economy that we've created through these subsidies. In the subsidies, or the Farm Bill itself, we then demand that farmers grow enough of these to ensure their harvest every year. And so to get crop insurance, these farmers have to be growing some large percentage of their production in these commodities that are backed by the Farm Bill. And so this false economy has kept farmers from being able to make the transition to growing real food. And this Farmers Footprint model really breaks the back of that false economy and harmful incentivization program. So we're very excited. It's thrilling to see farmers do what they do best, which is be intuitive, ingenious, inventors and problem solvers, and really take on a sense of freedom and independence again as they tackle food production on a real level and are supported at every level then, not just by the consumer, but by our education programs that the nonprofit supports. And so it's a real thrilling opportunity. So that's one way to engage. Coming soon in Farmers Footprint as well, if you want to be a community activist, we're bringing to you toolkits that will help you to do town halls so that you can do everything from just community education. It will include our documentary series. You can see the first segment of our documentary series on the Farmers Footprint, 22-minute amazing video showcase. A beautiful traits of family that's making this transition in Minnesota from 20 years of chemical farming to regenerative organic, and you get to see just the joy that's returning to that family, the reinvigoration of their business and their ability to get their own children back involved with the farm again, really creating multi-generational income streams for the future and securing that for the United States to have its own food production system again. In the United States, we grow a ton of crops, but almost none of it goes to food. And this program is really helping farmers grow food again. A stunning example of that is our state of Kansas, which is our most productive agricultural state in the union. From an acreage standpoint, 90% of the state of Kansas is covered in farmland, but they have to import 90% of their food. And 1 in 4 children in Kansas goes to sleep hungry every night because of a lack of food in the home. And so it's this ironic situation where the food subsidies and the growing of commodities crops of corn and soybean, alfalfa, and sugar beets has undermined the ability of these farmers to actually grow the food that anybody in the state would actually be able to eat. And much of that food is not just being brought in from distant states, it's largely being brought in from South America. And so here's Monsanto and these other chemical companies who have been swearing for 20 years that we have to do chemical farming to feed the world, to only find out 20 years later, we're not feeding the world. We're not even feeding our own people. We're just fueling the oil and gas industry and the chemical industry with these corn and soybean products that get turned into weird chemical additives in everything from the processed food industry all the way to the chemicals that are used in fuel production or the steel industry or chemical pharmaceutical industry. All of these crops are not being produced to make food. And so this is the excitement that we have again of bringing consumers back in touch directly with the value and puts the value in the food production rather than commodities production.
This is amazing. And I watched the Farmer Footprint, the documentary, and it's incredible. Just listening to these people of finding a new way of doing this. My dad is also an organic sheep farmer here in Ireland. So I get it. Like, it's just like going back to basics, and he just tunes into the land and what it needs. And but that is fascinating about the ploughing. So what other ways do they do this instead of using plows? And I was also fascinated to hear about the ancient soil, where that has come from.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll start with the farming techniques. Your dad's situation, your father's situation with the sheep is actually an integral part of soil recovery. And so we are now seeing that, the meat industry as a whole has been extremely destructive to our greater environment. Um, when we do the typical grazing pattern with cattle, for example, we tend to overgraze and damage soil systems very rapidly. What we're now doing with the regenerative agriculture model is we do what's called high intensity grazing management, where we move the cattle every 6 hours. So instead of putting a herd out on a plot of 100 acres for the season, instead we move them from small 1 acre plots to the next acre every 6 hours. And so what they're grazing on is no longer hay and grass that's seeded. Instead, we do 32 species cover crops, which immediately gets an ecosystem rebuilt. And so 32 species of cover crop brings in new bird species, brings in new insects, brings in the new pollinators, and suddenly you create this dynamic diversity of life in the bug world. And the same thing's happening in the soil. And so in the soil, you see a huge explosion of mycorrhizae and fungi in their diversity, billions of fungi on the planet. And so we just start scratching the surface of really understanding the complexity of just the fungi alone in a healthy ecosystem. And so imagine those 5 million species moving in to do work to regenerate the soil, build soil, pull carbon out of the atmosphere to literally grow soil. In a regenerative farm, we can grow as much as 2 centimeters to 3 centimeters of soil every 10 years. And that is an incredible rate. We used to think that would take 100 years to grow 1 centimeter. We're growing 2 to 3 centimeters in 10 years. So we are logarithmically speeding up the growth of soil. And so a really amazing opportunity here to connect not just the farmer back to an economy, but we're literally connecting ecology back to these farms and connect the bird life, the pollinators, and the microbiome back into the life of a farmer. And so by doing this high-intensity grazing, the hooves of the sheep, the goats, the cattle, whatever you're grazing, actually helps aerate the soil and do the necessary compaction and release of the soil density so that we get this rapid turnover. In addition, their urine and feces is an incredible delivery system of nitrogen to carbon materials themselves. And of course, the cow patty or the droppings from the goats and the like become their own ecosystem for the grubs and the insects that will come into those within 12 to 24 hours of the animals being there. By keeping the animals moving throughout, it makes them far more healthy. They've got a new untouched batch of growth that they see 2 or 3 times a day. They're eating living food instead of dried out hay and the like. And so they're moving constantly. Since the soil is only hit for 6 or 8 hours by the cattle, it's easy for it to regrow cover crop. Or if you're done with the cover crop, what we do is something called a crimper roller to finish that off if necessary. Or if the cattle have done enough to push down the biologic life of the cover crop, then you can just directly seed. And the way in which you seed without plowing is through a very simple device called a seed drill. And this is it's a mechanized version of how seeds have always been planted, where you stick a stick in the ground, make a little hole, and drop a seed in. When you plant your home garden, you don't feel the need to necessarily plow up the entire system. But even homeowners have that belief, so they're using rototillers and even just for an entire bed to go and plant a few seeds. We need to help both the gardener and the farmer realize I should leave that soil intact. I should roll down or mow down that cover crop and then let that become the armor on top of the soil that will keep weed growth down during my crop development. It will also protect this topsoil from rain and other elements that would lead to runoff or silting of the soil. And so just an amazing synergy happens as we stop plowing, allow the soil architecture to happen, allow the cover crops to create the biodiversity, and start to see our animals out there, our livestock, as co-workers instead of just food.
That's so beautiful. And just thank you for all of this vital information that you so passionately and importantly share. Where did the trees come into all this?
Great question. Yeah, the trees are exciting, and they're such amazing carbon sinks, but they're also, of course, home to so much biodiversity with the bird life and everything else. And so we're really helping farmers do a diversification of their land. So we have education partners at Savory Institute, for example, and the Savory Network for the last 50 years has been teaching farmers how to regenerate native prairie lands. And prairie grasses are in that they have this extraordinary capacity for carbon sequestration and recycling, as well as biodiversity banks. And so they really increase this. And so we can increase native grasslands. The boundary trees are critical for farms. In the United States, we've completely eliminated trees from our entire agricultural system, which was foolish. And so we have a number of farm educators in the United States now that are helping train farmers how to regrow trees as part of their income stream. Diversifying income streams is really a huge impact on farm survival, because right now they're fully dependent on that one corn or soybean harvest every year, or their cotton crop, whatever they're growing. And if that gets messed up, they lose everything. And right now we're losing about 8,000 farms a year in the United States to bankruptcy and loss of land because they can't pay off their previous year's bank loans that they used to get their crop in the ground. If we instead help our farmers realize, no, we need to have 6 or 8 or 10 different income streams, and the trees can be part of that. And so we can grow fruit trees, we can grow nuts and nut trees in rows between the crop that's being put into the ground, and diversify the tree environment. It also then allows them to bring in something like sheep or swine into those trees, a natural ecosystem for increasing the yield from your other crops as the bees and pollinators come in force, and you're going to get a better crop from your other food production system that you're growing in there. So nature at its core, fortunately, is synergistic and always eager to grow diversity. And so as we start to cooperatively, reconnect to this innate quality of diversity that Mother Nature calls for, we're going to see less collapse of these farms. When we try to do monoculture, we are inherently going against nature. And so those monocrops are going to fail. And Mother Nature is very good at making them fail. It'll find a virus, it'll find a fungus to kill that monocrop if you keep being stubborn and trying to fight nature. Nature is going to find a way to destroy your crop if you can't start thinking diversification. And I really believe we're seeing the same thing at the social political level. If we don't start to believe in diversification and the need for sociopolitical diversity, we're going to also die from unnatural causes at the sociopolitical level.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, this is like incredible information. So if I was to ask one more important thing that we could leave like our listeners with, that they could do to implement change, growing their own veggies, supporting in any way that we can with this farmerfootprint.us and all these other amazing ways of educating the farmers. And what is one last important tip that you would share with everyone listening today?
Yeah, so the last piece is really getting back out in nature in your daily lives. The human microbiome has never been under greater threat. The amount of bacteria now is a fraction of where it was in the population. And so you are now walking around with maybe a tenth of the workforce that's supposed to be generating your nutrient density, your immune system function, your body's protection systems. And so we can supplement you with those fossil soils and get you some way down the road there. But ultimately, we're asking you to rebuild that ecosystem of your body by reconnecting to Mother Nature on more areas than just your food. And so that's where it comes into breathing your ecosystem. So the breath that you take brings innumerable microbiome, fungi, bacteria, virus, all this natural ecosystem out there can be brought in a single breath. And in so doing, it has the opportunity to start to set up a new diversification program, if you will, in your gut and turning you from a monoculture into that diverse ecosystem of thrive and health. To get there, you need to get out into new ecosystems. And so explore is the short answer. Explore the world around you. We are so blessed to have the capacity to travel today. The amount of wealth on the planet has really allowed us to travel wide and far in our endeavors as humans. And too often that's to go to another big city and sit and buy, every time we go. If we stop assumption of travel and go instead to a microbiome reconnection to Mother Nature mindset, it's going to change where you travel to, and it's going to change your behavior when you're in those new environments. It can be as simple as a road trip across, a couple hours to a new ecosystem outside of the city, and get out and do some hiking. Get into the forest, sit down underneath a tree, run your hands through a fern, run your arms around a tree trunk and hold on to that tree for a few minutes. Breathe next to that tree. Let that tree speak to you. We need to reconnect on so many levels to better understand how to design our future. We need to start structuring our companies and the products that we would make around Mother Nature. And we'll never be able to do that if we don't discover her. And I really think that if we're going to survive past the next 70 years, it's going to take a complete reinvention of everything we do, everything we buy, everything we consume, to take Mother Nature into the equation first. And so that's my excitement is, can we all reconnect on a level that will help us become co-creative, redesign everything from the cups we use, where right now our clothing contaminates the ocean every time we do the wash. We're putting tons and tons of microplastics from our polyester clothing down into the water systems and out into the oceans that end up in the fish that would be out there in nature and that would end up on our plate. So we have to rethink everything. And Mother Nature will give us the template for how we're going to do it in the future to survive. And to find that, you're going to have to get out in it. And so go get out in it, go get up in nature, let it inform you as to what you're going to do differently in parenting. What are you going to do differently on your weekend trips with the kids? How are you going to educate your kids? Are you going to pull them out of school ultimately, perhaps, and homeschool co-ops or whatever it is in your community that reinvigorates those children to be a part of nature as well? And so on every level, you have the opportunity to reconnect. And I always close with the thought that human touch is critical. The way to diversify your microflora begins with who are you hanging out with? Are you hanging out with people that inspire you, that reconnect you to the nature of relationship, to the nature of intimacy? And so that human touch is critical. You reinforce microbiome every time you breathe together, every time you touch one another, every time you hug one another. And so I encourage you to go find a few new people to hug today, giving hugs in people's space again. We're too isolated through our technologies and the breakdown in communication that we have there at that intimacy level of human touch. And so get reconnected to the humans around you as much as the nature.
Dr. Zach, this is just amazing. And thank you for sharing this. And yeah, we are wired for that connection. And that's just something that I talk about every day. Just get out there, hug the trees, be in nature, be at one with nature. And the more we do that, and the more connected we are, the more that we are going to want to make the right decisions about as far as the way we live. Thank you so, so much for everything you shared, for Mother Earth, for humanity, for our children, everything. Like, I am so, so grateful for all that you've shared, and all your links and to the farmer footprint and everything will be in the show notes. So is there any last thing that you'd like to share with us before we say goodbye?
Yeah, so much more to share. My education website is just my name, zachbushmd.com. I've got information there from everything from pregnancy and how to maybe start to rethink that, all the way to the medical system at large, and in the banking industry. Once you find that there's a regenerative quality to nature, it redesigns and rethinks everything we're doing. So you can dive in there in the knowledge library there and on my website to kind of start to lay the foundation of kind of rethinking all of these different parts of your life. And then at the fossil soil supplements, you can find more science around how fossil soil is combating roundup and toxicity and the like around the planet. That's at the word restore, RESTORE, the number 4, life.com, restoreforlife.com. So Zach Bush MD, restoreforlife.com, on social media as well, Zach Bush MD, Instagram and Facebook and all that. And we'll keep connecting until we change the world.
Well, it was an absolute pure honor to be here with you today. So thank you for everything that you've shared with us. And I will definitely stay connected on all this incredible work that you're doing, and do my best to follow through on all this great guidance of how we can be the change. So thank you.
Thank you, Amanda Collins. Thank you, everybody on the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Each month, I leave free new moon meditations. Head over to amandacollins.com. There you'll find the registration link. If you would like to be the next review that I read, please head over to iTunes and leave me a 5-star review. I would be so grateful. If there's someone in your life that you feel could benefit from this episode, please share it with them now. We have the Priestess Remembrance Retreat coming up in August in Ireland, a women's journey of embodiment to reclaim and rebirth the priestess within. We're going to go to sacred sites and have our own beautiful manor with local organic foods. Join Laura Swan and I in August in Ireland. Please reach out if you have any questions. Now, Dr. Zach and I would love to hear from you. What are some of the things you've integrated into your lives, in your homes, ways of being to lessen our impact on Mother Earth and to start to create the change that is needed? Remember, by sharing some of your resources and ideas can inspire others to do the same. And another thing, please feel free to reach out to me and tell me who else you'd like me to interview on this show.
Thanks, beloveds, for joining us today. Please come over to amandacollins.com to continue the conversation and get access to all my podcasts, blogs, and videos. Did you enjoy this podcast? If so, please subscribe to the Amanda Collins podcast on iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. Feel free to pass this podcast on to your friends. That helps us get incredible guests to share their secrets for an inspired and joyful life. If you want more great resources, come over to amandacollins.com and join my mailing list for all my latest content. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm sending love and joy your way.